should have acknowledged the Honorable Minister, Honorable Octavia Alfred, Dr. Wayne Wesley, Registrar and CEO, our Council Chair, Professor Hilary Beckles, and our Deputy Chair, Dr. Marcia Potter, and all Council members. Of course, the executive of CXC, our hard-working CXC team. We are a team just a bit over 100. Some persons think we probably are in the thousands. Just a bit over, not even 200, 130, Dr. Wesley, thereabout. They are hard. I'm telling you, the team works non-stop. And I really want to say thank you to the CXC team. I think I'm probably going to say that about 3 or 4 times. That's how grateful I am. Of course, our candidates, the people of a beautiful island, Dominica, wonderful, I think it's called the Nature Island. Beautiful, beautiful. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. And of course, to the rest of the region that's looking on as Dominica has, I said to Dr. Wesley coming up that I'm not sure if that was captured somehow, but it will be very important for that display with the valedictorians and the salutatorians as we entered. I thought it was amazing. I've never seen it done anywhere else. So I do hope that you share it with the rest of the region. I mean, it was really, wonderful. So let me begin the presentation. Okay, great. So I'm cued. I have a colleague over here who is helping me out. So for the overview, what I'll give you is just an overview of what would have happened within the May-June 2024 examinations. I'll then move on quickly to the regional results and then to share with you results particularly for Dominica. Again, for the first time in Dominica, we will be launching our electronic pre-slip, so that's something to come at the end of my presentation, but that's another historic moment that we will have today. It would be amiss of me not to mention our local registrars right across the region who work tirelessly. They're our hands and feet on the ground. You'd have heard our registrar mentioning Miss Celestine, our own registrar. You have to share her with us. And so we really want to say thank you to Miss Celestine and all the other local registrars. Now, as I begin the overview, I'll turn your attention firstly to the subject entries, candidate entries. Okay, so the first slide speaks to the CAPE subject and candidate entries. And as you're seeing, we had an increase in both the candidate and subject entries this year. So that's telling us, and I think I shared this in 2022, as we saw a signaling of, coming out of COVID. And this is, of course, testament of that again. However, for CSEC, we saw a reduction in the subject entry, but an increase in the candidate entries. That means while we have more candidates doing exams, we have less subjects being done by those candidates. As we move on, we look at the CCSLC entries, and we're seeing a reduction both in the subject and the candidate entries. And later in the presentation, I'm going to say something more about this, because The Caribbean Examinations Council provides a suite of products to the region that assists any territory in particular would be fortunate to do the complete suite, because both from a strategic analytical position as well as a policy position, you're able to analyze and to see the performance of the candidates from primary right through to secondary. And I dare to say those who go on to utilize other products we have in terms of achievement for the associate degrees. But I'll say something more about that at the end. So while we're seeing this reduction, it is something that we are encouraging our territories to increase your involvement in some of these products, because as Minister said earlier, the competence that you want to recognize for the candidates can only be analyzed well if we can see, well, really at the peak level, if we can see that seamless trend. So we move next to the area of absenteeism. Absenteeism is not something that we're happy about, because once a candidate is absent, whether it is for paper 1, paper 2, or they did not submit an SB, you can well imagine that that candidate is going to be ungraded. And CXC is about affirming those competencies. We really do not want to have any ungraded. And Ms. Celestine will tell you that we work very hard to see how best we can recognize and accept as best as possible to make sure that we understand why those candidates are absent. So for CAPE, we saw an increase in the absenteeism. We saw the same thing also for CSEC. So for CAPE, we saw a 5% absenteeism rate, and unfortunately, this was more than we would have seen in 2023. For CSEC, we saw an increase likewise, but the rate was pretty much the same, 6.66 in 2024, 6.9% in 2023. So an approximate 7%, even though we are seeing a slight reduction. It's concerning to us, because we see subjects, for example, lowest, yes, for the agricultural area, but areas like visual arts and so on, we saw the highest level of absenteeism. So it is really important for the member state to do that analysis against what is important for your industry to thrive. That's the kind of analysis that will be necessary. For CCSLC, we saw a reduction in absenteeism against what we would not stop there. We did examination surveys, and while we're not finished analyzing the data, we are already able to identify 5 of the top reasons why candidates have stated their reason for absenteeism. And as I'm sharing on screen, they would have said personal emergency, that's one of them, not adequately prepared. So a candidate believes that he or she is not adequately prepared and decides not to attend the examination. Now, this, of course, is going to be, again, something that member states would have to look at, but regionally, giving that candidate support, whether private or in-school candidates, to understand what preparedness means. And as my mother would say, God bless her soul, you have already paid for it. So the worst you can get is an unacceptable grade. However, you may go, and as I can tell you, testament, that the Lord would have brought back things to my memory in examinations that I thought I would not have been so equipped. So I would encourage any candidate who selected that reason to say, give yourself a chance. At least attend, because you have already paid for it. Some candidates, unfortunately, would have had documented illnesses. Now, for these candidates, we do have something called compassionate consideration, and I'll speak about it a little bit more, share some more data, or otherwise commonly called hardships. So if for whatever reason a candidate would have been ill, they probably felt ill on the day of the exams, we do have a facility and our local registrars submit accordingly, as well as death in the family. And in sharing that information, we do take it into consideration depending on how many components they would have missed. And of course, we are assuming at this point that preferring not to attend is different from not being not adequately prepared, because you could decide that you're not attending for various reasons. So as I have there as a note that we will do this is just preliminary, we'll do the in-depth analysis and share it with the territories so that you can do that deeper dive to inform you how you go forward. But it is important for us to view that. I move on to giving you a synopsis of the general administration, what we have as our electronic assessment, as well as administration using a new methodology, hybrid electronic assessment. Let me begin by providing some general information on the general administration as it would have happened in 2024. For this year, we reduced the examination duration to ensure that we had earlier release of results. So by 1 week, and you would have seen that we are releasing results earlier by 1 week. I must pause, however, to continue to encourage all member states as best as possible to be involved and to participate in electronic assessment. Because as this increases, you can well imagine our digital natives who have said to us when we do stakeholder engagements that this is their natural space. But I am aware that territories will have to put the necessary infrastructure in place. But as we spoke yesterday, Honorable Minister, we're not going back to pre-COVID days. We're prodding along as COVID would have forced us to kind of leapfrog in this area. So I must say congrats to Dominica, who is on this pathway, and we do encourage both Dominica and other territories to continue to enhance in this particular area. For the general administration, we did what we call the hybrid assessment, which I'll speak about, and we had a pilot in January, and we did a bit more in May, June. So we analyzed that information, and we thought it went well. Unfortunately, this year we had a few suspected breaches reported, some unfortunately malicious. It is something, I continue to say to our team, and the team we often refer to is the educational ecosystem. We work together as partners. It's not about the Caribbean Examinations Council alone. It's not about the Ministry of Education. It's about every community member, parents, everybody together will have to treat with this, because once it happens at this level, it continues right along the fabric of the society. Now, as a part of finalizing our results, we will continue to do the reviews, and any action that needs to be taken, we will do it at the end for certification. So it's important to note that we saw, I'm just going to give you one example, for example, with the candidates for modern languages. Candidates were trying to memorize what was the situation and analysis and sharing it with other candidates. So CXC in the middle of that had to push out additional questions equivalent to what others would have done. So it would not have affected the quality of the process. But every time we do that, we hit the pockets again of the Caribbean Examinations Council. And I leave that, if I was to pause and give the registrar this podium, he would preach another gospel. But I think that's for another time. Examinations were impacted by many things: bomb threats, weather conditions, and other activities that would have happened across several territories that are named there. But as I said before, CXC knows how to manage hardships. I move on to speak about the electronic assessment. Whoever moved that a while ago, thank you very much. The electronic assessment. So all our multiple choice components, the component of that exam is currently offered via our platform, electronic platform, facilitating that kind of assessment. We have the structured paper for 5 subjects, for example, digital media, animation, game design, information technologies, paper 3-2 in particular, and so on, are offered only electronically. And we are looking to increase that kind of offering. This year we saw approximately 53% of the CSEC candidates who indicated an interest to do the MC component via the e-assessment modality actually doing that. 69% approximately for the CAPE candidates doing likewise. I will say, unfortunately, we saw a slight reduction in terms of the number of candidates overall sitting exams using the electronic assessment modality, but an increase in the CSEC, number of candidates doing CSEC against previous years. So I move on to the hybrid e-assessment quickly. The hybrid e-assessment, as I'm showing you on screen, is a combination of 2 things. Now, we are conscious that not every member state has the various infrastructure in place to facilitate electronic assessment. And so, the CXC team would have designed what we are calling another innovative solution, where the territory can have the actual question paper, that component, reflected on screen, and the candidates answering as they normally do in their booklets. What that does for us would be several things. So what you're seeing on the left would have been what the candidate would see on the exam, and what you're seeing on the right is the actual answer booklet, just with the stem and the lines. There are no security risks where this is concerned based on our initial pilot. So our stakeholder feedback reflects that they would have seen, and this includes our local registrars, greater security of the examinations. So we would not have to be printing any exams, we would not have to be shipping any, there's no storage, so it would be cost effective and greater efficiency on both sides. Of course, the comfort level of the candidates, we had various responses, but I would say generally, accessing the questions online and writing in the booklet, they thought it was very useful, comfortable for them. Connectivity issues, but no negative impact. Why? Once the question paper is downloaded, there is nothing to be uploaded. So we just need to have it down. If electricity goes, we know most laptops can be preserved for a while, right? What if the candidates can use their tablets? You can just imagine it's a new era. So this is something that we believe will provide some continued success, as I have it there on screen. Last but not least, it's a soft introduction to electronic assessment. And so this is something that we're looking to utilize. Last but not least, in relation to this area, for marking and grading, there would have been no challenges marking the hybrid assessment, and the candidate's performance was consistent with the overall performance. In fact, for the candidates who did the hybrid e-assessment, we saw a very slight improvement. So let me hastily go to the school-based assessment. This is, of course, always a pet peeve for me because once a candidate does not submit a school-based assessment, and no, we're not, as you know, from 2020, we're not looking for the scores, we're looking for the actual submission of the school-based assessment. So without that, the candidate will not get a grade. So here we're seeing two figures that you have to look at. The second column is showing the percentage of the SPA records submitted to CXC. Of course, we have seen an increase for CAPE, and when I show you CSEC, you'll see an increase also. But that 2.86% of the candidates not submitting to the teachers is where we have to do the roll-up sleeve. As far as I'm concerned, one candidate missing is one candidate too many. Likewise for CSEC, I did promise, and I'm saying we are seeing the reduction overall, increased submission to CXC, reduce the non-submission to teachers, but still, it is something that we do not want to encourage. Now I move on quickly as a part of the overview to the irregularities and hardships. Now for irregularities and hardships, we have two concerns. Let me tell you a little bit about irregularities. Irregularities are about candidates carrying their cell phones, candidates believing, unfortunately we had these cases here, impersonating another candidate. So for example, I am going to do the exam for Dr. Blaze, or Dr. Blaze is going to do it for me, right? So that wouldn't work because I'm male and female, so probably Miss Celestine. Yeah. And you're finding that they're trying to pass off as another candidate. That's not good, but it happened, right? So, of course, the situation was identified and the candidate is not only disqualified, but debarred for 2 years. So it's a very serious matter, okay? Things like cell phones, we saw a lot of cheating this year. If you notice on screen, you're seeing a number, 54. Last year it would have been what? 36. That's a big increase. And candidates have to sign to agree, yes, this is what happened. So we're not just making it up. The supervisors and vigilators are not making it up. They are telling you, I did this. As well as they're caught, literally, with the phone, looking. One candidate said they were Googling the question. Unfortunate, right? It's not something we want to see, right? So, you know, I said it last year and I'm saying it again, ethics. Integrity, it's critical for the fabric of us as human beings, but more so, as Honorable Minister mentioned, the ideal Caribbean citizen. I've learned that it is not what you want me to be, but who I believe I should be. So it is not the fact that nobody there is looking. It's about me. And that ideal Caribbean citizen must stand out. And so I'm encouraging the region, encouraging our teachers and the system as a whole. Some of the things that are happening are not at the student base. And I'm going to encourage again. People of the region, ethics and integrity. If there is anything they must say about us, they must say that I want to hire you because you have integrity. The 478 hardships you're seeing there, we would have dealt with all of those. That's what I mentioned about the death in the family or sick illness or anything at all like that. The bomb threats, all of those we take into consideration. I'll move on to the actual regional results. So that gave you an overview from registration all the way through to marking. At this point, I would like to pause to join my registrar in thanking our examining committees, thanking our markers for giving us yeoman service this year. Without you, this would not have been possible. And so we just really want to say thanks to our markers who are knowledgeable, trained, standardized. They go through so much. So probably we have some in the audience, but we really want to say thank you. As we move to the presentation, firstly, we are showing on screen the entire suite of our products at this time because CXC is doing more to come. And we move immediately to the CAPE results. Now you are aware that we have the first 5 grades are what we deem as acceptable grades. And so the focus will be on those 5. So the presentation I provide is just a synopsis of some of the subjects you could not manage to get on, but just highlighting a few. And so I will begin with biology. So for biology, we saw a reduction in the overall performance this year, even though we had an increase in the number of grade 1, as well as some consistency there across the other levels. For Unit 2, we saw a reduction likewise for the Unit 2 in terms of the overall performance, but an increase in the grades, in the grade 1 again. For Caribbean Studies and Communication Studies, 2 key subjects, especially for candidates at this level, we saw an overall performance of 95%, a reduction of 2%, and again, an increase not only in the grade 1, but also grade 2. For communication studies, we saw an increase of 3%, both for the overall performance as well as for our grade 1s. We did see, you can see on screen, some increases at the various other grades. But it's important to note that you, Dominica, as well as other member states, will have to do the deep dive as to why we would have been seeing these kinds of changes. French Unit 1, 95%, steady at the Unit 1, a reduction at the grade 1. Likewise, for French Unit 2, we had a reduction for the grade 1, 10% in fact, but the overall performance in terms of acceptable grade would have been 100%. So in other words, all candidates would have gotten acceptable grades. And that's important to note. For Information Technology, Unit 1, we saw a slight increase overall performance, but of course you're seeing there an increase again at the grade 1 level. You see a lot of this as I go on. It's very interesting phenomenon where we're seeing a lot of the grade 1s increase generally, while you're not necessarily seeing that across the other grades. For Unit 2, we saw the stability carrying at 96%. We've been seeing that for about 3 years, as well as the grade 1 and 3 for the most part, and 4. Integrated math, we saw a marked improvement here from a 68% to 73% for these CAPE candidates, as well as an improvement you're seeing there for grades 1 and 2. So this is significant. Integrated mathematics is one of those subjects that they utilize to get the associate degree. Literatures in English, Unit 1, stability in the overall performance of 94%. And as we would have seen in 2021, we are seeing that 1% grade 1 peeping up there for this year. The last 2 years we saw none. So we give thanks for that. For the Literatures in English, Unit 2, again, we're seeing a 3%. Last year it was 0. This year we're seeing a 3%, so that's good. And an overall performance of 95% for the region. Physics Unit 2, a 97%. That's the overall performance. Slight reduction, and a slight reduction also for the grade 1. For Physics Unit 2, we saw an increase from 23% to 32% for the grade 1. In fact, it's the best we have seen for the last 4 years. But the overall performance being 97%, a 1% increase over the previous year. For Pure Math, Unit 1, we had an 86% a reduction from the previous years, not only on overall performance, but also for the grades 1. However, for the Pure Math Unit 2, we saw an increase of 3% on the overall performance and an 11% increase on the grades 1, and also an increase you're seeing there in relation to 5% on the grade 2. So overall, they did better. Tourism Unit 2, we saw a 2% overall improvement in the overall performance and a 1% on the grade 1. Similarly, consistency with the overall performance, but look at the grade 1s there. Generally consistent. So why this is important for us? Tourism is the mainstay of the Caribbean. We're not seeing, however, though, the registration numbers that we expect to see. So it's a discussion that we are having in-house because we want to understand why this is happening. It's important. It's our mainstay. So we need to have more candidates registered and also being successful. But this is good in terms of the fact that there's stability and improvement across the board. I move quickly to CSEC. Here, the acceptable grades 1 to 3. And so we move to biology. We begin the biology. We're seeing again consistency for the overall performance of 76%, a slight increase in terms of the grades 1 and 2, but a reduction in grade 3. For Caribbean history, we are seeing an increase, in fact, the best we have seen in the last 4 years, something my chair will be very happy to see. A 4% increase and stability at grade 1 with overall improvement right across. For chemistry, another science subject, we're seeing a reduction overall performance, but an increase at the grade 1 level. English A, very important subject. You would have heard the registrar mentioning this area earlier. 76%, while it's a reduction from last year, it still is very good as we have it over the period. The consistency at grade 1, while we are seeing a reduction at 2 and 3. Now, French, the modern language as we have it, we're seeing a slight reduction for the overall performance as well as the acceptable grades. Human and social biology, we're seeing an increase of 9% overall, an increase generally right across for grades 1 to 3. Human and social biology is pretty new syllabus. The first time would have been last year, January, I believe, and so this is showing some good improvement there. In fact, you're noticing that while it would have been new, I think it would have been 2023, so you saw the 71%, but you see the candidates getting used to the syllabus and the teachers doing very well there likewise. And of course, we don't want to forget our parents. Information technology, a reduction to 81%, and grade 1, 2 reduction, but stability at 3. Integrated science, this was very surprising for us because this is usually stable in the 60s. We're seeing a reduction to 58%. Of course, the registrar would have mentioned mathematics. This is a sore point for us. Unlike English, you remember you saw the English A, that's English A pretty much in the 70s? Right, you're seeing the math here at 36% this year. I want to pause a little bit with this one though. So the 36%, if you notice there, it is less than last year. But you have to recall that as we look at as we do the analysis, and this is something, of course, each territory has to look at the grades, the grade 1s. You see that increase in the number. Even though it looks slight, remember the population is almost 80,000, right? We are seeing that improvement there. So in some cases, you're going to find that in some territories, you will find an improvement, of course, and in some territories, it would not have been looking so wonderful. However, overall, we need to get out of this rut. So we have already thought of some new strategies that we're expecting to push out next year to see how regionally we can assist and move with the region in making sure that we see some improvement. Now, when I have to be cautious how I use that word, making sure, because remember, it's an ecosystem. It's not about CXC, it's a teaching, learning, and assessment. So while this is one of the areas of concern, it is something that we have to do together. Office administration saw an increase in the overall performance, physics likewise, and the principles of, physics likewise. Unfortunately, principles of accounts saw a reduction to 67% from the 72%, with some stability at grade 1. Principles of business subjects, we saw stability at 80, and it's generally the same year on year. But social studies saw an increase to 62%, the best it has been over the last 4 years, with the ones moving from 1% to 3%. For the modern language, likewise, a similar reduction as we would have seen with French. Now, so that gives you a synopsis of the region and the work that we have to do, particularly how we do it together. I move to Dominica. So Dominica, I'll start with Cape, but I want us to just one point that you have to understand. For Cape, Dominica has a very small population. So any change in an individual, in the performance of an individual candidate will shift these statistics really greatly. So please take that into consideration. I start with Caribbean studies. So you're seeing a reduction from 87% to 68%. For communication studies, a reduction from 95% to 76%. For the information technology unit 1, however, we saw stability of 90%, as a performance you would have had from last year, and the 90% would have been good over the last 4 years. Consistent with that is the information technology unit 2. All of your candidates got acceptable grade, 100%. Now, consistent with the region, you also saw a large increase with integrated mathematics, moving from 30% to 51%. If you do the math, you're seeing that's a 14% change. I move swiftly to the CSEC level. Dominica's performance in chemistry, consistent with the previous years. You maintained the 82%. Again, the best you have seen over the last 3-4 years. And as well as the ones. You're seeing the 60% moving to 22%. Congratulations. For English A, the stability of 84-83%. But what does that sound like? Do you remember what I said for the region? Correct. The region would have been 76%. Your performance is 83%. Likewise, you had an increase of 1% on the grade 1. English B, likewise, 84%, a 10% increase overall performance, and a 4% increase on the grade 1s. Family resource management, 94%, the best you have had in 4 years. You would have seen an increase in the grades 1 and 2, a slight reduction in the 3s, but guess what? That would have meant the candidates would have moved up to the grades 1 and 2. That's marvelous. Food, nutrition, and health, 96%, the best you have had in 4 years. And you see the improvement in the grade 1. Always remember, when you see that improvement, you do the math. It could jolly well be that movement. So that's for you to do that deeper dive, but that's the initial interpretation we can have. For the human and social biology, like the region, you would have done very well in this area, but you would have moved from the 80s into the 90s, and 95% overall performance. Looking at the 1s and the 2s, great movement there. For information technology, 86%, a slight reduction there. Well, a little bit more than slight reduction, but you will do the math and see what's happening. Now, for mathematics, while you have stability similar to the other years, it is something that you have to look at. I think, though, that as we look at it, it looks similar, but I think it was, you have that kind of analysis that you do. I think it was about 38